Welcome, and thank you so much for joining today for another careers webinar with Yale School of Management and our Alumni Relations Office. Thank you so much, Kayla, who is behind the scenes making all of this happen for us every single month. Today, we're going to talk about behavioral interviewing and how to shine. First things first, we see this slide often in these webinars. I want you to hold this time for yourself today. And I also want to let you know that I'm going to have time for questions. So as they come up for you during the session, please don't hesitate to share them in the Q&A box, and we will get to those at the end. I do have a lot of material, but I always do try to hold time for your questions because I like the interactivity of it, and I know those that ask them appreciate it. And I also want to encourage you to kind of put them out there during the session. I will address them at the end, but feel free as things come up, you can certainly populate them. A recording is going to be available afterwards. So if anything you want to look at or listen to again later, you're welcome to do that. And Kayla Heaslip, my colleague in Alumni Relations, will send that out afterwards. So in terms of our agenda today, I'm going to get into why behavioral interviewing, a little bit about what it is, and why employers use it. We're going to talk about preparing for those behavioral interviews and stories. And we'll then get into a couple of resources for practice, and then finally wrap up and the Q&A that I promised. After the session, you will receive a request for feedback, and I would very much appreciate it if you could take a few minutes and fill that out and share it. I'm here for you, and I'm sharing this information for your benefit. So anything that you can share with me to help me to understand what worked for you or what you might like to have be different in the future would be helpful. So thank you in advance for doing that. So let's dive right into why behavioral interviewing. First of all, it's one of many techniques that employers will use. And I love to share this idea of how we judge ourselves and how we interview and how we apply for jobs. A Longfellow quote is a favorite of mine that says, "We judge ourselves by what we feel capable of doing, while others judge us by what we have already done." And behavioral interviewing is a bit of an opportunity for us to bridge that gap, sharing how the skills that we have and the experiences we have set us up really well for future opportunities, and what it would be like to be in that organization with them solving the types of problems that those organizations have. Behavioral interviewing helps to share whether we walk the talk, sharing examples of what we've done, how we've done it, and what we've learned along the way is a great way for those potential employers to evaluate whether your style would mesh with their culture. And at the highest level, a behavioral interview gives a sense of what it might be like to work with you. Your interviewer is considering hiring you. There might be other people they're looking at as well, and they're wanting to learn more about you. So they're less interested in the details, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, of your prior company's business, except where they showcase the skills that you are going to bring in to their organization and how you lead. This is especially important to remember when you're looking at making a pivot. So in terms of interview techniques, at its most basic, the interview purpose is to figure out that fit. Are both parties going to benefit from this new joining? It's a conversation, and that's something else that's really important to remember. It needs to be an exchange, two ways. Your objective is to get the offer of a job, and the employer's objective is to find out what you have to offer in terms of skills, abilities, basic knowledge, who you are in terms of your personality, character, and interests. And some interview structures evaluate skills first and then cultural fit. Some do a high-level screen of competency for the fit first and then dive in to some more technical details, and some use a more blended approach, asking lots of different types of interview questions in a single session. Some questions might be closed-ended, some might be open. And I just want to kind of give you this flavor of all of the different types of questions and techniques up front so that you can start to consider kind of how each plays into helping you to showcase your very best self to this potential new employer. Oftentimes people talk about HR screens And those folks are often ones that are most integral in the behavioral parts of the interview. And if they don't like you through the screen, if they don't see that fit in terms of culture where you're going to actually accrete to and make the culture better, that might, even if you're the most technically competent, screen you out of the process. So please don't discount anyone. And the other thing I'd like to say, and this is going back into the olden days when we actually used to be in person, be kind and nice and polite to everyone, because oftentimes the people at the front who are greeting you in a reception and such, they get asked too if they liked somebody when they came in. That shows a lot about who you are, how you actually treat everybody through the process. So before we kind of move ahead a little bit into the showing the potential, I want to just remind you that smart preparation for any interview, pardon me, any interview is more than responding to the posted opportunity. You have to do your research beforehand. Walk in with a sense of that culture so you can ask questions so that you can figure out if it's a good place for yourself as well. Consider your own values and preferences. A great role on paper does not always translate to a great experience. And just because they like you does not mean you're going to like them. So I don't want you to settle through this process. In terms of showing your potential, let's dive in. Let's dive in a little bit more here. Will you fit in? And how do you share who you are? There's some really strong frameworks that can help you to organize. And oftentimes stories are focused on past experiences and behavior because they can be predictive. And stories of experiences and your skills do create credibility. That's what your resume is sharing, those skills and expertise. So if you got the interview, they probably have a pretty good sense that you have the right skills, that you can do the work. They are going to dig into these later on in interviews. The question in a behavioral interview, though, is whether you can do that work well with their people. They're trying to figure out who you are, and that's a big piece of what the conversation is. Demonstrate your value and fit. Behavioral questions are the opportunity to show you can drive results and that you know how to do that with their business in mind. Many people in their stories tell long, detailed stories about the other place, the place that you're leaving. And some of those details aren't necessarily relevant and they could be confusing or even detract from your story. So I want to make sure that you're thinking about all of your stories relative to the work that you're going to be doing, not necessarily what you've done. I also want to remind you to think about how you're connecting with the people that you're talking to. You want your stories to be consumable and credible and compelling. So again, be thoughtful about the person you're speaking to. Are you talking to a direct manager, somebody who might be in an adjacent field or function? And really kind of be thoughtful about what they care about. Taking it from the top, what are some of these behavioral questions? Well, they're some of the most hated questions, and they're most likely to be asked. And they're some of the easiest questions to answer if we take the time to prepare for them. They will come, do please expect them. Here's a couple examples of many. Some of the handouts that if you do refer to the handouts after the session, and even on the alumni website, we have lists of 30, 55 questions. You can see them all over the place. There's lots of different choices. And I really would encourage you to never, ever walk into an interview without being able to answer at least a couple of these very strong questions, especially why are you interested in working here? This slide might look familiar. I shared it last month. This is what's in demand. This came from the Future of Jobs report for 2020. And these are also some of the things that we're looking for to demonstrate in terms of your ability to get work done in new environments. We require a lot of adaptability in the world that we're living in right now. And I don't see that changing even when we, quote, get back to whatever our new normal might be. The impact of remote work on skills also needs to be successful. So think about how all of those elements play in as well. As you consider the stories about your prior experiences, do please, again, think about them from the perspective of the new employer, their industry, their competitive sets, what they need. Which of your prior skills are they going to find most relevant and most useful? This is also important. How you show up to them matters. I share this picture because a lot of folks that I get on the onto coaching calls with don't actually have a good lineup when they're playing into an interview like this. Right now, the way I've got my camera set up, my eyes are pretty close to even with where the camera is. And there's not a lot of space above my head. If I didn't have my virtual SOM background on right now, you'd see that I'm looking straight on and you're looking at a wall behind me and not at the ceiling. A lot of folks, their screens are angled down. So it's almost like they're looking down on you, which is a really different experience from being across the table from someone. So think about setting up as if you're across the table and take some time to check what's behind me. And is this a good scene to showcase my executive presence in a way that it's not going to be distracting? Some common bad practices that I see, I mentioned misalignment with the camera, where you don't have perceived eye contact. If I start looking down here, I might still be looking at you on my screen, but it doesn't feel like I'm engaged with you anymore as I do when I'm looking straight on. A bouncing screen, if you're typing, when you're taking notes maybe on your screen while you're doing that, distracting background noises, resting your face on your hand when you're talking, it muffles your voice, and also for those people that might play poker, it's also a tell where you're either hiding your voice or you don't feel heard, or you're hiding something. Poor lighting. I've got 3 lights on in my room right now just to make sure that you can see me clearly. I talked to somebody recently who was actually in half shadow, and that's not a great way to make a first impression. So be aware of all of these different types of things. And there's articles all over the place around setting things up well. New York Times, Wired, there's a bunch that actually can showcase this. And I do usually spend a couple minutes with folks in coaching calls just getting that set up right. Not because I demand it, but because I want them to be best set up for success in their own interviews and interactions. Last thing I'll say on that really quickly is it doesn't necessarily need to be where you work all day. Your meeting is what's important. And you might have a different setup for when you're actually working on your computer versus working on your screen, visiting with someone. So tell me about yourself. This particular example here is pretty linear. It's kind of like a tombstone. I was born and I went to school and I studied accounting, and then I started my career in public accounting, and then I was invited to go work with one of my clients, and then. It's not terribly persuasive. There's not a story about who you are and what your benefit is and why you would be a great person in this particular organization. And there's no factual or compelling examples to showcase some of your relevant skills that are required for the role in question. So that's an example of how to perhaps not answer, tell me about yourself. Give you another one here. There's lots of questions to engage with here. Well, I love people, and it's important to me to do work that makes a difference. This is one of the reasons I'm excited about this role. Your company, vision, and mission excite me. Colleagues would tell you that I always look for ways to make things better. I love opportunities to share my excitement for sustainable production methods with others, helping them to see new possibilities. And my early career foundation in accounting has set me up well to effectively manage the financial aspects of project-based decision-making. There's lots of ways to engage. We know who you love to work with, and I can ask you a little bit more about that, types of projects that you've done, what you've learned along the way. How have you learned about these sustainable production methods? What specifically about my mission excites you? Lots of ways. Lots of ways. So hopefully you have a sense now of how different the answer to the same question might be. As we dive in, let's talk about what does it mean to shine? If you're well prepared for an interview, you've done your research. In December, I talked about creating powerful intentions. So I'd love you to have an intention for the time together. You'll have some understanding about who you're talking to. You might have done some research about their organization. You might have talked to some people who worked with them in the past. You might have an idea of who might be adjacent business partners that you would work with. And you've been thoughtful about the most important skills for the role in question. And you've prepared some stories around those relevant stories. You don't want to necessarily kind of be able to talk about your entire career because not everything's relevant. Some of you know that my background is as an accountant and I have an MBA in finance from Stern. I'm not using a whole lot of that experience in what I'm doing right now. There's a lot of it that I did bring forward in terms of critical thinking and analysis and asking really smart questions about different businesses that I've been exposed to throughout my career for the benefit of the people that I'm coaching. But in terms of doing some of the specifics in, Black-Scholes option pricing model math or other statistical modeling methods and things like that, that's not a part of my everyday. So I don't necessarily need stories about that. I do need stories about what is important for this particular role. So get really clear. Don't overwhelm yourself. Get really clear about the core skills that are really helpful. A hint that I have for many people is that if you've done your research, you walk into your interview and you're able to say something along the lines of, it seems that the successful candidate will have these skills and be able to accomplish these results. Do I have that right? At which point your interviewer is either going to tell you, absolutely, you have that right. Great analysis. You seem to understand really well what we need. Or they might tell you the couple of places where you missed something or you need to speak about something in a little bit more detail. Knowing that up front gives you a hint about how you might want to tailor your stories a little bit differently through the interview as they continue to ask questions. So creating some intention about what specific skills and experiences you want to showcase, and just to think about, what do I want the interviewer to remember about me at the end of the interview? What am I going to tell other people? How will I differentiate myself from what might be other really well qualified candidates? If you've thoroughly unpacked the job description, which I talked about, I think last November, and it's on a recorded career webinars as well, you're going to have a pretty good idea about the day-to-day job responsibilities. That is also going to be a good clue into what's going to be most important. What potential challenges might you be facing in the role? How will your progress be measured and performance generally? Where you're stepping into a role that requires new responsibilities, it's important to showcase that you understand what's going to be asked of you and that you do indeed have those requisite skills. Practice the stories. Writing them down isn't enough. Saying them out loud is better. Speaking them out loud to other people where you might get some feedback is better still. Winning here is where an interviewer has a really good sense of who you are and that you'd be a good fit for their organization. You've got the requisite technical skills and you'd mesh well with the team, and you have the personal skills that would make you a great employee. So as I think about this slide and I think about getting ready, sometimes the getting ready is more important than anything else because it sets the stage for what you're going to do next. And having that really clear intention and knowing what you want to convey is going to set you up to be able to achieve that pretty clearly. Effective answers when you're in a behavioral interview are structured. They're verifiable. And they have the appropriate level of relatable detail. It's in language that's resonant to the company in question. And they're memorable and repeatable. So that if an interviewer speaks to someone else, they'll be able to say what they liked about you and maybe share a little bit of the story that you've shared with them. Always, please keep that interviewer in mind. I've said this a couple of times already today. Think about what it feels like when somebody shares an inside joke. Make a concerted effort to help them to be in the story. Again, this is where too many details of your old work or language that's not resonant to the new organization is kind of like that inside joke that makes people feel set apart and creates distance when you're really trying to create connection. This is also really kind of important to think about. Often it's less about the details. It's more about how you approached the problem. That's what the behavioral part is all about. What alternatives did you consider? What were some of the details around the circumstances that presented as the problem showed up? Who did you engage with? And sometimes the results that you might have achieved aren't good. The question might be, tell me about a time that you had a difficult challenge in business that didn't work out. I want you to be able to tell that story with a smile as well, because you learned something from it and they know that you're going to actually make smarter problems in their organization for them. We did also talk about powerful storytelling back last summer. So that's another reference that you can actually go back to and have a peek at as well if you want to play with it was a dark and stormy night types ideas to help people to remember. Talked about framework. This is a framework that you might find to be useful. Situation, task, action, result. It helps to really clarify how you drove outcomes. You show what you bring to the table by identifying which of your experiences demonstrate those skills and attributes most needed by the employer. This framework makes it manageable. You start with a couple of those skills, as I mentioned earlier, identify the ones that you think are most important, and develop stories about them. The clearer you are, the better you can pick and choose which stories to tell and tailor those to your audience. The benefit, or a benefit, of the STAR framework is that it might feel like the story is going to get too long at first, when really it creates a frame, it creates a crucible in which to tell it so that you know when you get to the result, you're done. It prevents you from sharing all of those oversharing extraneous details that could often distract from the result and your impact. So situation, task, action, and result. When you've gotten to the result, you're done, you pause, and remember, I said earlier, it's a conversation. It gives them a chance to ask some clarifying questions or go deeper in a place that is really more meaningful to them. And having that opportunity for them to participate in dialogue with you gets you to know them a little bit as well too, and more about what the role might be and what the requirements might be, and if you even want it. Expect those follow-up questions, plan for them. Can you tell me a little bit more? How did it turn out? What happened next? Too many people show up with canned stories, so please don't do this, where you're not able to start in the middle or jump ahead or fast forward or rewind. The stories that are too factually laden and they're organized just the way you think about it aren't generous to the person that you're speaking to. Again, this is about creating connection and helping them to understand and have a vision in a little bit about what it's like to be in relationship with you and work. You want a fluid, engaging conversation that helps your interviewer to, again, imagine you in their company. So please do be ready to jump forward, backwards, in the middle, wherever. How you answer throughout demonstrates your value and leaves the interviewer intrigued. If they're asking more questions, you've done some good work in terms of piquing their interest and they want more. This is a good thing. Set them up for that. They're more engaged when they're asking. From a perspective of neuroscience, some of you know that I geek on neuroscience. This is a best practice. It's akin to a great headline in media. When we skim our news feed, we jump around based on our own personal interests. Don't tell them that you're a great fit. Set them up to be energized by their own insight that you'd be a great fit. We tend to be much more committed to our own ideas than we are to any others that people put forth. This is a resume best practice also. So think about the stories you want to tell someone that showcase your relevant best skills and experience, and then your bullet points set them up to ask those questions. So if you've used this framework all the way through, you kind of know what they're going to ask before you get there because you've shared it with them. Some of you might be nervous. It's been a long time, maybe, since you've interviewed last. Just wanted to remind you that you were born to speak. This phrase I learned from my friend Richard Newman, who wrote a book called You Were Born to Speak. And he reminds us that babies know how to attract attention, positive or negatively. They let us know how they're feeling. You know how to do that too. So be authentic and show up, relate, and recognize that through the process, by adopting a growth mindset, a child's mind, you'll be amazed at what you might learn and what a difference that makes in your search. Closed mindset, I can't, I'm not able to, I'm limited, they won't like me because that's not helpful. How can I? And being curious and, kind of, I don't want to say knowing no boundaries, but trying to figure out over, under, or through, how can I get there? That is going to make a huge difference. So I have a big conversation with folks about mindset. And by the way, Carol Dweck, who is known for the book Mindset, is actually a Yale College graduate as well. So if you've not watched her TED Talk or read her book, I would highly recommend that because mindset is key to a great interview process. I mentioned this earlier as well. Use feedback to refine your stories. It's feedback, not failure if something doesn't land. You want to figure out what landed and what didn't land. And maybe it's a great story, but it wasn't the right story for that particular audience. So again, we didn't quite tailor it well. And I want you to kind of think about, as you're playing with the feedback you're thinking, notice and be curious about thoughts that support growth and learning. And do try to surround yourself with people who are challenging and building your ideas as opposed to dissecting and destroying, which can be a little bit uninspiring and energy sucking. Stephen King, author, has a phrase called "kill your darlings." Sometimes in our stories, there's parts of these stories that we are so attached to. Again, they may not all, those are for us, and nobody can ever take those away. They may not be what that next organization needs or what the person you're talking to needs or will find resonant. So if it doesn't land with them, it doesn't serve you, regardless how much you like it. Finally, in your interviews, remember that you're always learning, if you choose to, by your questions and comments, and they're learning a bit about you and what it's like to be with you by how you show up. So it's all about being collaborative with them. And that's a big piece of what behavioral interviewing shares. So moving forward into some resources, hopefully that gives you a frame for how to think about story and how to get things set up. We'll go through again, and I mentioned practice before, can't say it enough. Practice your stories, practice your questions. There's a couple of different ways to do this. You can record yourself on Zoom and play it back, or even on your phone. Share with a colleague, better yet, and get some outside feedback. When people come to me for coaching, this is actually quite important. Please don't come to me with simply a question of, I want a mock interview, or can you tell me if my resume is good? If I don't know who you're interviewing with and what the role is, and or if it's a LinkedIn profile or a resume, who you're trying to attract with it, I can't answer the question very well. So you want to actually give that feedback or request that feedback and give somebody a little bit of context for who you're talking to so they can give you really good feedback back about whether it works out. This is a really cool one I found on LinkedIn. If you go into jobs and interview prep, there's actually questions that you can answer around different roles that you're interested in. And with premium subscriptions, you get a variety of different answers, not just one. And you can also see a video of what some of those good answers might look like. So I'll share a couple of examples in a few minutes about that. So many ways to practice in this virtual Zoom world that we're living in. And also I want to encourage you, I talked to somebody just this morning who's getting ready to get to prepare for a phone interview. You can hear if people are smiling on the phone too. So do please practice and be as energetic as you would be in person on a Zoom call if you're on the telephone as well. Let's see. Um, Last point here. The point is to connect with them and to share with them how your stories are helping you to be a better candidate, a better team player in their world. Sometimes when we try to be too smart and show people how smart we are, we miss those opportunities to connect. So I want you to think about when you're in that space, you're sometimes judging yourself more than you are present in the conversation and picking up on nonverbal cues that they may be offering as you're telling the story. So do please try to be present in the conversation. And this is also why practice is so important. So you are in a place not to be so focused on internally, like what was the next part of the story, and where it is that fluid conversation, you're right there with the person and you can pick up what they're putting down. So a couple of examples, and these are right out of the LinkedIn.com interview prep that I was mentioning before. Why do you want to work here? It even tells you, why are they asking the question? They're trying to understand what prompted you to apply, and demonstrating your interest by showing some very specific reasons for this particular job, not the company in general, but this particular role. So you've done your research. This question shows them that. An answer might be, I understand that you're looking for a leader who can implement, scale your data analytics platform. Over the course of my career, I've implemented data analytics platforms for 3 companies. Each had its own unique challenges that required me to grow and learn and expand my skill set. I'm energized by new and complex challenges, and I have the background, experience, and successful track record required to implement this system within your organization. The space in which your company operates is also of personal interest to me, and I would love to contribute to it and help the company grow. When I started at my current company, I had a team of 4 people, which scaled to 28. I led the team in designing and building a big data platform for this big global company. Ultimately, we expanded the user base from 100 to 1,200. I'm looking forward to this next chapter and challenge, and believe I can bring real value to this organization. This answer clearly shared expertise in helping grow and scale, and it was clear that the candidate had interest. So if you think about what do you want them to know about you, I think it answered the question, why do you want to work here, pretty clearly in a couple of different ways. And there's a lot of places for that interviewer to go in and ask other questions. Here's another example. What would your coworkers say about you? This question they're asking because they want to figure out how you fit in with the team. They're also trying to figure out if you have some emotional intelligence and know who you are and how others view you. Can you highlight your strengths as well without bragging? So here's a potential answer. Years ago, I read a book called Seeing Yourself as Others Do. The book posits that while we're young in our careers, we can get away with being aggressive in our work style and stepping on toes to get things done. As we progress, we're inevitably tasked with more responsibilities than we could ever handle alone, and it becomes imperative to have support around us, regardless whether there are direct reports. I've taken this message seriously and built relationships with people around the organization. I regularly meet with people from other departments with whom I don't normally work. Because of this strong foundation, I'm comfortable picking up the phone and asking for help from a large number of colleagues. And it isn't just one way. I regularly get calls requesting help and advice on a wide variety of projects. As such, I would expect that my coworkers would say I'm personable, supportive, hardworking, and thoughtful. We spend more time with our coworkers than we do our own families, pre-pandemic anyway. So it's important to keep professional relationships strong for team morale and success. Why did this answer work? It highlighted an interest in career growth and meaningful investment over time. And the relationship-based answers shared strong collaborative skills. It also very clearly answered the question. While there was a little bit of buildup to what would they say, we very clearly got to what that person thought they would say. So that's another kind of really important point. Make a note of what they asked and make sure that what you said answers those questions. I mentioned a place to go for questions. There are some on the Yale career website, the alumni portal. You can get a list of, I think, 55 questions there. This is a great list that you could just Google or hit right through on. It's the Muse. It's a job search blog. And I love this list of 30 different behavioral questions in 6 different categories. So I often, even if somebody's not quite sure what they want to do next and they're starting to contemplate stories about times in their careers that they felt really fulfilled and times that they haven't, I will suggest that they have a peek at these behavioral questions because it might highlight for them some things that they want to repeat or have more of in their careers and some things that they might not want. So playing with this from that kind of a preparatory standpoint could be useful as well. So it's not just when you're ready to get preparing for a specific interview, but more about who you are and how you want to be in work, what kind of relationship you want to be with your colleagues and your companies. Interview Prep 101 dictates that you should have your elevator pitch ready and a few stories polished and a good sense of what you have to offer. Again, lots of practice, ideally aloud, is going to get you there. I mentioned earlier that we're building on our own basic research. This particular Google page that I have over to the side, I typed in interviewing at McKinsey, and in 0.53 seconds, I had 632,000 results. One of the first result that came up says what we look for: personal impact, entrepreneurial drive, inclusive leadership, problem-solving skills, and finding your fit. So they're telling you what's on the test. So please, if you're getting ready to go in for an interview, don't hesitate to really comb through all of their information, especially for alumni. If we're going into an organization not through the traditional kind of career office path right out of college or graduate school, there are often experienced hire pages that help you to understand this. The second item that came up here is making the most of your McKinsey interview. It says very clearly, all McKinsey interviews contain at least 2 parts: a conversation about your personal experience and a case study. Again, it's telling you what to prepare for and what you might expect. I also encourage you to reach out to your people. Informational interviews are a great way to understand from all levels what it's like to work in companies that you might be targeting. So again, please don't wait until you get the interview to reach out and start talking to these people. Understanding the culture and developing relationships with people within an organization is a sure way to be advised of, and I talked about this in the hidden job search last summer, when jobs are about to be opening up, because by the time it hits LinkedIn, it's probably already been posted for a little while. So those informational interviews for target companies would actually help you to find more opportunities than you would have found otherwise. Walking in with a sense of culture so you can ask thoughtful questions about them definitely shows that you've done your research. So please do build on your own basic research about companies as you put together target lists. I also encourage you to step into that space of perspective taking. I shared in those 2 examples a few moments ago why a company might be asking certain of those behavioral questions. There's a lot of LinkedIn learning courses and other places that talk about how to conduct a behavioral interview. So you can look at the perspective of what are these people looking for, because you're seeing it from their point of view. So that perspective taking is a great way to learn. And there's a lot of videos there too, so you can see some examples of what might be good practice and what might not be. So we're almost there. And we do have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So hopefully there's a couple queuing up. In terms of what's next, let me just do a little bit of wrap up here. Tell me about a time. So we prepare to close this part of our session today. Let's review a little bit about what we discussed. Do please think before you speak and be clear about what you want them to remember about you. And be clear also that you know what the question is. Do use a structured framework to ensure that you get to what's most important in the STAR framework. That is your result. Though the result, without understanding the buildup, doesn't tell much of a story. So you do want to make sure that you have all of those pieces of the framework. And I also want you to think about, again, that idea of how do you want people to interview or to remember you? How do they want you to, how do you want them to experience you? I remember a number of years ago, I was doing some speed coaching. It was at the after the 2008 financial crash, and I was in New York, and I was 15-minute coaching slots at the New York Public Library, and people were bringing their resumes and they wanted coaching advice on them. I didn't have enough time in that small bit of time to thoroughly read their resume and give them the feedback that they needed. So what I did was I said, tell me before I look here, what are the 3 things you want me to remember about you after having read your resume? And they would think a few minutes, and it wouldn't be right off the top of their head that they would have these. And they'd finally tell me those 3 words perhaps, or those 3 phrases. And I'd say, okay, great. Show me where in your resume those are showing up. And oftentimes they weren't there at all. So they're not going to figure out or remember these things about you if you haven't actually put it out there for them to receive, either on paper, on the resume, or in your stories in a clear, resonant way. So again, start with that. And perhaps this may be the biggest piece of feedback and advice I can give to you as experienced executives and experienced hires. If you're interviewing for a CEO role, please show up like a CEO. Don't wait for them to say, oh, we think you're ready for this. Just show them that you're already there. I looked at a cover letter a couple of weeks ago for an alum, and that was my first piece of feedback. I read the first 2 sentences and I was like, does this sound like what a CEO would write? And the response was, no, it doesn't. I'll come back to you with a revised draft. And the next one did sound like something that a CEO would write. So show up in the way that you need to demonstrate that you're ready to take on that leadership role in their organization, and they can confidently recommend you for that. So final thoughts. Again, companies want you to present yourself in ways that highlight what's most important. So they're going to show you what's on the test and do your research. If they're not so good at that, help them to understand maybe that you've done some research from other points of view, other companies. This company or this healthcare system, for example, does it this way. I'm not quite sure, how do we do it in this organization? The how-to pages do usually, though, show you what's on the test. You might need to dig a little bit to find what you're looking for, though. Trust it's there. Growth mindset. Be curious. Keep looking, and it's amazing what will pop up when you trust that it is there. Again, mapping what you've done into their frameworks is really important. Communicating in their language in ways that they think about it builds trust and rapport, and that's part of connection. I also want to make sure that you feel connected to them. And again, it is 2 ways, so that the thing that you're asking for in terms of stepping forward in this interview is something that's going to be rewarding to you and fulfilling to you in your own career. So just because they like you doesn't mean it's necessarily the right path forward. Some of these points I shared last month as well in redesigning your career in 2021. So again, I'm reminding you that all of these webinars support each other as part of a more holistic career management process. And there's lots already in our archives, if this is your first webinar, to go back and look at in support of your career journey. And speaking of webinars, here's just a couple of those that are out there. And you can also go directly to our Yale School of Management YouTube page and click on videos, and you'll see them tucked in there too, with a whole bunch of other really remarkable content. And I'll say here again, thank you again to Kayla Heaslip in Alumni Relations, who makes pretty much all of this happen behind the scenes. So without her, I couldn't actually make most of this stuff go myself. Finally, in terms of resources, here's a couple of the pages on the alumni portal. And again, we have more events coming for you in the coming months. So please check those out as well and get those on your calendar. And you might also think about, in terms of resources, I didn't put those on this page, if there are skills, maybe if you're pivoting and you're looking to enhance some things or to showcase some things in a language that is new to you from an industry perspective, LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, and edX are great places to go for some of that content and quick learning to be able to translate your skills into the best way that the company that you're talking to will receive them. Final note on leadership skills. We didn't really talk about that, and that's such a big part of interviewing behaviorally as we're growing and moving up in our careers. Your ability to engage and inspire people and a workforce becomes even more important. You still need to know what they do. Um, Interviewers, we're going to use a few scenarios to understand how you might respond to some different situations that could come up in the course of your work. So again, please don't overly rely on your technical know-how. Emotional intelligence and an ability to be adaptable and innovate in our incredibly disrupted and changing world is super important. And continuing to be in that learning growth mindset is as well something that is important for all of us always. So that's what I have for the presentation, and happy to follow up with anybody on their own in coaching appointments. And at this point, I'm going to see what we've got going on in our Q&A and chat. Let's see here. And Kayla, thanks. I see there's a couple of things that you've already shared in our chat, and hello to a couple of folks that have said hello in there. It's nice to see you. First question here. For internal informational interviewers, does the recommendation on detailed background lingo change in the STAR answer format? Internal informational interviews. I think it depends on the nature of the informational interview. I love that you're actually looking at preparing for those informational interviews. That's actually something that's probably really important to remind people. Every time you're talking to somebody, it's a possibility of having a connection or a referral. So I do want you to prepare for anything. So you're going in not saying, tell me about your company, but rather ready to share a few things so that that person that you're talking to might be comfortable in referring you along to somebody who could be a decision maker or a hiring manager in their organization. Detailed background lingo. I would say that, kind of the STAR framework in an informational interview could still be absolutely relevant if that person is asking you, or if you're trying to demonstrate that you in fact do understand what the company is about. The questions might be different though if you're going in and talking to somebody who is a fellow SOM alum. You want to show them that you're thoughtful and that you've done your research about the company. You may be asking a little bit more of them and then playing back to them what you've heard relative to things that you've done in the past, showing them that there's some connection there. So I'll give you my famous graduate school answer is it depends. It really is a function of what the intention is of the meeting, how long the meeting is, and what you're hoping is a next step coming out of the meeting. So I'm hoping that answers that question. But perhaps the most important thing coming out of that is for any informational interview, it's so important for you to go into that as well prepared too, because again, that person could open up the door for the next great opportunity for you. The other thing there is I've seen in recent months particularly, and this has been true in job search kind of forever, we find some of the best opportunities through our networks. So when people that you're talking to are really, really clear about who you are and about what you'd be good at and about what you're interested in, that's when they'll say, when they hear something, oh, I've got the perfect candidate for you. And you might find some job opportunities when you're not even looking for them. So again, it's really being clear with anybody that you're talking to makes it really, really helpful. And the STAR framework as well gives a format that might be easily memorable or repeatable. How does your advice differ for C-suite and other senior leader roles? I don't know that it does. I think it is kind of the same advice. You might have different organizational issues if you're in the C-suite versus if you're at a divisional senior leadership or senior management role. What's important though is stepping back and saying, on any given day, what am I going to be responsible for? How am I going to spend my day? And which of my skills and experience are most relevant to this company or this organization that shows that I will be able to lead them in ways that will make a positive difference long term. and will be competitive, sustainable, and continue to build growth organizationally and operationally in the years to come, in spite of whatever disruptions might come. So the issues faced by those people in those roles will be slightly different. The preparation around identifying those issues and then mapping in the story might be quite the same. What might be differently important, depending on the role and the nature of the competitive industry, is an understanding of what else is going on in other companies, competitive sets, what's going on even in other parts of the world, what are best practices, and that's I think something that's really increasingly important as you're moving up, is to be open to looking out and taking in information from a lot of different places. I think that's another thing that really distinguishes some more significantly senior leaders to more junior people, is you can't see everything, and you really, to be a successful leader in a dynamic organization today, need to trust and have rapport with your employee base such that they are freely sharing with you information that you can synthesize to adjust the plans and strategy for the company forward. So I think it's the same advice. The complexity and the specific issues might be different that you're preparing for, but it's pretty much the same in terms of how we want people to remember us. It's going to be relevant to the role and what's going to be important to succeed in this particular role. Let's see, there's a thanks for demystifying behavioral interviewing. And again, this just barely scratches the surface. There's so much more we could talk about with regard to behavioral interviewing and interviewing generally. Hopefully this is getting you curious and starting to think about how you want to approach interviewing, and maybe even making it a bit less intimidating, where it is a give and take, and we do have this opportunity to interview them too as part of a dialogue. Is there an article that describes different company cultures? That's a great question. I'm not sure that I can come up with an article. I was looking through LinkedIn and a couple of different corporate newsletters that I receive earlier today, and I'd say that it depends on what company or industry that you're interested in. It's just you just start to read, and then there's also sources like Vault and Glassdoor that will tell you something about company culture, where sometimes those people aren't so happy when they're making those reviews. Sometimes they are, but those types of data points give you information that will be helpful for you to figure out if a company is right for you, because some people might love that culture. It may just not be the right culture for you in which you would be thriving. So my short answer is read much and often. And again, it really depends on what you're looking for. Some of the consultancies have some really good functional articles that might be helpful to understand an industry better and the players, like competitive players across an industry. So hopefully that helps. See what else we have. What about written tests? I had a verbal offer for CFO, but was rescinded based on the test that said I was more focused on issues than people. That's interesting. So that is, some of the behavioral tests are, they're assessing culture fit. And I actually amusingly can tell you a story. Some of you heard the story that I used to work for a company and was caught up in a restructuring. And somewhere along the way, or at the beginning, I had 18 interviews, first of all, with this particular company, 18 different interactions, which causes me to question now why they needed that many people to decide if I was the right person for the organization. And I found out about a year and a half into the role that, in fact, I had failed that behavioral part of the interview. And it wasn't that I'd failed it. It was that the organization had a certain way of being. And I was a bit more, out there in terms of, well, let's try this. And they liked things more slow and steady. And it was just simply that it wasn't the right fit. And the story was that my HR colleague that shared this with me said, we wanted to be like that, but that's just not how we are. and that's where that might come out. So and this is important as well. I actually posted an article on LinkedIn that his from the Wall Street Journal. It was talking about the characteristics of your next boss. It's actually kind of gone quite global, with I think 150,000 views globally since Saturday, which is kind of crazy. It talks about the importance of the issues and the technical experience, and having also emotional intelligence and an ability to really work with people. So this is a bit of a long answer to that. People skills matter. And if you're not in that space of being really thoughtful about emotionally intelligent leadership, you might at some point hit a ceiling. So if you want to kind of reach back and have a personal conversation about that and a coaching conversation, I'm happy to. Certainly happy to do that, because that's an opportunity for a lot of people. And it's hard in a lot of cases because some people have never actually been exposed to that kind of leadership. So if that's the case, it's challenging to not be able to, it's challenging to not be able to kind of model some of those things. There's another question: what kind of tests are common for C-suite roles? Again, my graduate school answer is it depends. Different companies have different structures, different styles. Some might like a behavioral battery assessment. Some might like to do a strengths finder, Clifton Strengths, or something like that. And there's a variety of different organizational assessment tools to show what companies, in order to help to identify if you fit into that culture, if you would be a good match. That's again another place where informational interviews are really helpful, because if you have an understanding of what's important to that company, what their competencies or learning principles are, you're able better to prepare for those and to understand how you might answer questions in ways that that showcase a good fit. Of course, if there is a good fit. So I'm sorry, I don't have a specific answer to that, because it depends on the company and the industry, et cetera. So let's see if I've got anything else here, because we're coming up on the end. I think I might have gotten them all. Kayla, do you see any other questions here?
No, I think you covered them all.
And it's not 1 o'clock yet, so we did it. I just want to thank everybody again for coming in today. I know that you probably are going to leave maybe with more questions than you came with in terms of your own personal preparation. And again, please feel free to reach out to me and make a personal coaching appointment if you're an SOM alum. And Kayla, thank you in advance for sharing the slides with participants that registered. They should go out, kind of in the next couple of days with the recording, and the recording will be out there as well if you want to watch any parts of this again. Thank you again for being here today. Thank you, Kayla. And I wish you a very happy day and good weather wherever you are. It's snowing here in Connecticut today. So be well, and hopefully see you next month. Thank you.